Good morning. This is Alex. That
And
was
this is the deal.
there we go. Not, you know,
No.
we are recording today. Our topic is Linavelle's story. I want to say something on this because I was thinking about what I wanted to just intro with. And a year and a half ago, roughly, when Linavelle was diagnosed, I thought it was the end of the world. And I
I
give a
think we
lot
both
of
did.
I give a lot of love, not only just to Linavelle, but I give a lot of love to Jacille because the courage that she displayed and how she handled herself was very admiring. It was admirable. And ultimately we went with what Linavelle's body said that she needed and we're continuing with that. So I intro with that. Let's talk about Linavelle. Take me back to the earliest point.
Well, I mean, the earliest point would be our wonderful water birth in our apartment in Virginia Beach, where she was born with just you, me, and a photographer. And that was my second free birth. And, everything was normal, I would say. She was healthy. Um, we kept her attached to her placenta for like 3 days. We had a lotus birth. Her umbilical fell off on the third day, and she, breastfed, no issues. She was the calmest baby by far. My boys were very attached to me. Especially my second, I could never put him down. Where Linavelle was, as long as she was fed, she was good. Daddy could put her to sleep, and as she got older, she even would go to sleep by herself. I remember we just had to like lay a hand on her back, and she would just lay down on the bed and just go to sleep, super chill. And then around, like 2.5, they all started getting a little bit spicy, and she did too. But I would say it was probably around 9 months old that I started noticing that she was doing this, funny face at the time. It was weird, and it also looked cute. Like she would scrunch up her face and pucker up her lips, and she would go like this, and then she would stop. And I remember mentioning it to Alex, and I'm like, something's bothering her. And I was like, I don't know what it is. I was like, she makes these faces every now and then. Well, as time went on, I realized that when she made these faces, her lips would change color. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I was like, that it looks weird, like her lips are turning purple. But I could see that she was still breathing, like her stomach was, coming in and out. That was around the same time that we, a few months went by, and we knew that we were going to be opening a restaurant. So I knew that I was going to have to put her in a school or something. And at the time, there was a local school that was started by a mom who homeschooled her kids. So it wasn't your typical um, academic or private school. So they didn't really have a curriculum, anything like that. It was more, free, like a homeschool type of environment. So I was like, cool, we're going to put the kids there. And lucky enough, they took children as early as 6 weeks old because they also had like a daycare licensing or whatever they call it. So I went to get her a physical at 12 months old, and I told the doctor, and I told her pediatrician, I said, hey, like she's making these faces and her lips are turning this color. And the doctor was like, oh, yeah, it's just acid reflux. Like it happens to all kids. And she kind of just brushed it off. And, me not really seeing anything else going on or any other symptoms, I said, well, that sounds about right. Because at the time, she would also get like this gulping noise in her chest. And I was like, it's probably something coming up, whatever, like it's acid, it bothers her. That's why she's making those faces. And for the next year, things kind of remained somewhat the same. There was a little like uptick in occurrence where I saw it happening a little bit more. And it wasn't until the summer of 2020. So now she's 2 years old, 2.5, of the summer of 2020. where things started getting like way worse. And what I started noticing was that she was losing her balance during these episodes. Like it seemed like she would, just be standing there playing and like something would happen. She was kind of like stumble over. Um, they started happening at night a lot more and they sounded more intense. By November, it was, obvious to everyone who was around her when she had these episodes that, something was going on. And once again, her lips weren't always turning purple, but by now, I think with every episode, her lips were turning purple. And she would also like lose, she was already pale. She's pale. Like when she's not tan, she's pretty white, but she would look even more like she would get extremely pale. And the reason I would know is because when she would get her color back, she would look like she was like flushed red. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but like this doesn't look normal, like something's going on. And I called her, because COVID, they don't want people going in. So I called and I remember speaking to like a doctor and then basically telling me it's acid reflux again. At the time, we had noticed that she also was not tolerating like whole milk very well because her brothers loved drinking whole milk. Whenever she would drink it, she would get constipated and all this. And doctors just kept telling me that it was food allergies or that, it was just food intolerances and it was acid reflux and that no. And finally I was like, no, like you guys are going to give me an appointment. I'm going to go in, like I need to see her pediatrician. Something's going on. And my children, I don't take them to pediatricians. We don't go to appointments. Like that's not something I do. Like unless something's wrong or we have to go to the ER, I don't go to wellness checkups. And that's just because I don't see the necessity of them. But anyhow, when I took her in and I explained everything to her pediatrician, she even had a small episode right in front of her. She saw her lips turn purplish, husky, like saw all this happen. And it was very minor at the time. She, even after this episode, looks at me and tells me, well, if it was my daughter, what I would see is that she's not throwing up. She's on the growth scale. Like she's where she needs to be on the growth scale, on the height scale. She's growing. Everything's great. These episodes resolve themselves. I wouldn't worry about this. That was her response to me. And when she said that to me, I felt anger, like so much anger, like coming up inside of me. Cause I'm like, she even acknowledged that I hadn't been there in a year. And she's like, oh, like what brings you here? And I'm like, I'm concerned about my daughter. And for her to give me that response, I'm like, okay, I don't come in here every other week concerned about something. I am telling you I'm concerned about something and you're going to blow me off. And, she kept telling me it was acid reflux. So she tried to get me to pick up the medication for acid reflux. She's like, give it to her for 2-3 weeks and then we'll come back. If it is acid reflux, it'll be gone. And I looked at her, I said, no, I'm not putting her on a medication without a diagnosis. And she tried to argue that there really is no way to diagnose acid reflux. It's all symptom based. And I told her, well, then get me to a specialist that will diagnose it for me. Because I said, I'm sure that there are other signs other than symptoms to diagnose acid reflux. To where she's like, well, if you really want the GI consult, go home, talk to your husband. I'll call you back in the morning. Which also pissed me off because I'm like, why do I need to go home and talk to my husband? Like, I'm telling you, I want a consult right now. But anyway, I left and, I called Alex and I was like so upset. And I was like, well, she said she'll call us back in the morning and ask us if we really want the GI consult. So the next morning she calls and, as soon as I'm like, yes, we want the consult. Like we want the GI consult. So it was another couple of weeks before we got in with the GI doctor.
What timeline was this all? Just for the listeners.
This is like November, December of 2020. So this is like November, December of 2020. I think I even had one more pediatrician telehealth appointment after hers because I was just so upset. And the next doctor actually diagnosed her with constipation. Like this is on her medical record. She was diagnosed with constipation. And I'm here telling this doctor she has bowel movements every day. And the doctor said, yeah, she's constipated. I'm like, she has bowel movements every day. And the doctor's like, yeah, it sounds like constipation. I'm like, okay, what is the definition of constipation? Like, I'm confused now. Because I was like, I'm telling you, she has bowel movements every day, and you're telling me she's constipated. But okay, let's, whatever. But anyhow, we got the GI consult, and I go, because COVID, you can only go you and the patient. So I went to the appointment, and as I'm explaining everything to the doctor, he asked all his questions, whatever, and then I'm getting into, her symptoms and what's been happening. At what point he turns around and he's like, nothing you're describing sounds like acid reflux. And that's the first time that I was like, oh, because that was the first doctor who said this doesn't sound like acid reflux. And he looks at me, he's like, you should probably be talking to neurology. And I was so confused because I'm like, what is he talking about? Like, neurology? Like, what do I need to see neurology for? And he saw like the confused look in my face. And he's like, well, we don't need to go down that road right now. He's like, let's just finish here. We'll reach a conclusion and then we'll talk about that. And I was like, yeah, that sounds better. I was like, because I don't know where you're going with this. So we agreed to do an endoscopy, whereas they sedate the child, they put them to sleep, and they stick a camera down their throat just to be able to see if it is acid reflux, there's going to be signs. And that's what he explained to me. He's like, if she really does have this severe acid reflux, like her, whole esophagus, everything inside is going to be like torn up from the acid.
Well, and they
Like,
and they take tests too. They take little culture.
Yeah. But he basically was like, we'll be able to see it as soon as we put the camera in. Like, it should be obvious if it's really this bad. And I said, okay, great. Yes, let's do it. Because at this point I was like, I don't care. Like, I need an answer. I don't know what's going on with my child. Like, it's been going on for a year and it's getting worse and I don't have an answer. And her pediatrician wants me to just give her acid reflux meds. So we agreed on that. And at the same time, Alex, I don't know if you want to speak of this. You had been going to your chiropractor and kind of like talking to him about what has been going on. And I think this was like January, because now we were waiting after, oh yeah, the endoscopy, we had to wait like a month, I think it was, because this was like January. Now we had to wait a month into February to even get the endoscopy. So from November, when this all started, now we're looking at February to even have the appointment for the procedure because of COVID and all of this and blah, blah, blah. And then prioritizing what's important, what's not important. And then at the time you started talking to your chiropractor about it because we weren't getting answers from the doctors.
Yeah, I remember, oftentimes receiving phone calls from Jasil and listening to her frustration and uh with how the insurance was and stuff like that, like the availability for appointments in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. There's always a wait time. And so after we got all these initial, like she went to the pediatrician and got that feedback, and we were waiting for the GI, the endoscopy, excuse me. We started to take videos because we felt like we needed to provide proof that it wasn't a GI related thing. And I had taken a video where it was up to that point, it was the worst seizure that we now we know is a seizure. The episode, it was the worst episode that we experienced up until that point. And what I loved about my chiropractor is that it was just not a monetary exchange. Like, he honestly, we would get in deep conversation about many things every time that I was there. And I said, hey, look, man, I'm having a hard time. My daughter, she's experiencing these episodes. They think that it's GI. I really don't think it's GI. He's like, let me take a look, and I showed him the video, and he immediately said, you need to get your daughter to the ER. You need to take her to the ER, because he's like, those look like seizures. I'll confirm with he's like, my wife, she's a doctor as well. We have neurologists friends that we speak to regularly. We hang out regularly. I am going to I'm going to send this to them. If you send me the video, if you don't mind, I'll send it to them and I'll reach out to you as soon as possible. And so I took that information back home, and the endoscopy was the next day. I remember this very
Yeah.
clearly. Like I was talking to the chiropractor. The next day was the endoscopy. He had told me I needed to get to the emergency room ASAP. And I told you so. I'm like, like we've been waiting this long. Let's just wait for the endoscopy to see what it says, the results. I acknowledge what the chiropractor's saying. Let's just see what we get. And we both agreed that was the course that we were going to go on. Later that night, around 10 p.m., he sends me a message and he's like, "Look, I created this group chat with two neurologists, one that works at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and my wife, and I sent them the video, and they all agreed that those are seizures." And we just held on to that information for a day or two. We took her to get the endoscopy. The results came back that nothing was GI related, and the medicine they had given her was was a I'm going to use the term suppressant just so it can get a little bit more get a little bit more into detail, but it was suppressing her ability to have more seizures. It was basically a seizure medication, a
So
form. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say no. So the endoscopy, the doctor came back with the results to tell us, and he's like, there is no sign of acid reflux. And he looked at me and he was like, you need to call neurology right now. He's like, you need to make that appointment. And that's when like it started to sink in for me that something bigger was going on. And still, like at that moment, I still wasn't even thinking seizures. Like to me, they were like I still didn't know what, but by the way he told me, like I was like, this is fucking serious. And right there, I called right away the appointment line. We have TRICARE, through the Navy, and you have to call, the appointment line to, and I couldn't even call right away. So I had to call her pediatrician first to put in the consult for the neurologist. Then I had to wait 2 to 4 days for the consult to go through, and then I could call the appointment line again to then book the appointment for neurologist. And once again, during COVID, like now we're like on 2021, early COVID. Who knows how long I would have to wait to actually go get seen by the neurologist. Typically, it was taking like 2 to 3 weeks for appointments. So, right there in that moment, like we went home knowing that it would be another 2 to 3 weeks before we got seen by anyone.
um
This is Lumi.
I'm laughing because Lumi's playing with Giselle's face. But yeah, so during that time, after as we were waiting the 2 to 3 week process, the I can't remember the exact drug name, and that's irrelevant at this point. But
So it's the anesthetic that they use to put her to sleep during the endoscopy. It has the same effects as seizure medication, so it suppresses seizures. So we went home and we both agreed that we were unwilling to wait that 2 to 3 week process of going like through the neurologist and all of that. And since we were in the military, we knew that ER visits are covered. So I said, you know what, screw this, like we know it's not acid reflux. Let's take her to the ER, like your chiropractor originally like told us, like let's just go to the ER. Because my thing was I didn't know if they were gonna fully test her if we just went to the ER, because I was like, I don't want to waste my time going to the ER just for a doctor to be like, oh yeah, she's fine, or go to your doctor or whatever. So we went and I told them, I was like, I think she's having seizures. So they admitted us, and they actually paid more attention to us at the emergency room than like her pediatrician ever did. Like they actually took me serious. They actually listened to what I said. And it wasn't like, oh, you're just, being a crazy mom. You don't really know what you're talking about. Like your child's fine, go home kind of thing. So they actually like listened to everything I had to say, paid attention to me, and they hooked her up to what is it, EEG? No. I
They
don't know.
it was a EEG. So
Yeah.
they were like, okay, well, let's stay and see if she has an episode. And we didn't know at the time that the anesthetic that she had taken for her endoscopy was actually gonna hold the seizures. We didn't know that. So like we're like, okay, we'll stay. And we stayed for observation for probably like an hour, hour and a half. And then they finally said, you know what, we're gonna attach an EEG monitor and we are going to admit her upstairs for monitoring, basically to see if it is seizures that she's having. And so we did that process, very painful. And
So it's I don't know if anybody knows, it's like what 50, 60 nodes that they attach to the head, and you have to be very still because they have to put like this glue, you have to attach it, like hold it, like they put this air dryer on it, and then like they have to attach the other piece. And this took over an hour. I think it was like a 90-minute process because she was screaming, she was shaking, violently for the entire process, like screaming bloody murder. They had her inside this like blue Velcro thing where it's to keep the child from moving. But she literally screamed bloody murder this entire process. And I was so angry because like I didn't want that happening to her. And I also knew like if we wanted answers, like this was part of the process of having to get those answers. So after that was done, she was very defeated, and she let the doctors like essentially do all her checks after that. She was just like, yeah, I don't care. Check my temperature, check my blood pressure, check everything, where before she was fighting those checks. After that, she was just like, you guys win, like do whatever you need to do. But yeah,
and I,
they admitted us. They did that first still during the ER, and then afterwards they went ahead and they said, if you're fine with it, like we will admit you upstairs and you will get a room upstairs. So then they admitted us, and we went upstairs.
yeah, so I want to just I say take a pause. For those that are watching the video, I'm getting a little emotional because I'm thinking about it's coming up for me in that exact time. And I want to go back and talk about you at the very beginning talked about Linavelle's birth being very special. And I'm only speaking on my half, but like I want to go down that road for a second, and then we can come back and finish the story. That Linavelle, her birth was the first time that I was really able to drop in and be present to a different level for myself and for Jacille, and really, her birth was very revitalizing, rejuvenating for us. Um, and I immediately felt a bond with Linavelle deeper than any of my other children. And I don't say that in a negative way, but I really felt a bond. And as Jacille was talking about the hospital ER visit, I started to get emotional because I remember at that time seeing her crying and screaming and going through all that. And I was hurting. I was sad. I was, like I had to step out of the room a few times because it was really hard for me. And as I look back on this whole journey from now, and as we're reminiscing on the story, Linavelle has been our biggest teacher. I've expanded to depths that I've never expanded before because of Linavelle's leadership and her personality and everything that she's gone through. And like I get emotional thinking about that because in a day and age where we oftentimes don't take children's consideration or feedback, and we're like, we're making the best decision for ourselves. I can fully say throughout this whole process, we really made the best decision uh, with input from Linavelle. If that sounds, that can sound crazy, but like, Linavelle's body and her mind and herself, like she has really given us feedback, and not in a verbal way. She hasn't like voiced anything, but like we've been able to really analyze and get to a deeper level with Linavelle. And that ER visit, that point was even deeper for me because Lumi was, 9 months old, or like she wasn't, or no, she was almost a year old. Excuse me, she was 11 months old,
Yeah.
and And so I had to be the parent to go and be in the hospital with Linavelle for the week because they weren't during COVID. They were only allowing one parent and no sibling, or two parents, but no siblings. And you know,
And I was still breastfeeding. She was still like, highly breastfeeding. Like, yeah, she was eating, but she was mostly breastfeeding. So I was unwilling to, do overnights, and leaving Lumi, which, we had great friends at the time who took the boys on a dime, so we could go take Linavelle to the emergency room. And I tried to keep Lumi with me, but once they admitted us upstairs, they were just like, yeah, no, which, not going to talk about that in this podcast, but
it's
yeah, anyway.
another story. Yeah.
Anyhow, they wouldn't allow me to take Lumi, so I would only go for a few hours at a time during the day to like bring them food and whatnot and to check on her. But I was, I wasn't able, or I wasn't willing to spend nights there leaving Lumi behind. So
Yeah.
I would go every night and, be with the kids.
Yeah, the hospital visit was a very hard transition for us. And I say us, speaking Linavelle, because like you're going from playing outside with your brothers all the time and getting to run around, and Linavelle was active, and then going into the hospital and being hooked up to a monitor and staying in a room for 7 straight days or 5 straight days.
Well, it was three. So let's talk about this. So the EEG, they hooked her up, and for 3 days she didn't have a single episode. And by the day and a half, I remember telling Alex, I said, it has to be from the endoscopy. I said, they put her to sleep in the endoscopy. And the nurses swore up and down. They were like, no, it's not. Those meds left her system after 12 hours. And I'm like, I am telling you, this girl has had an episode every single night for the past at least 6 months. And you're telling me that the endoscopy, which is the only new thing inside her system, has nothing to do with it. And I was like, it totally has something to do with it. And they swore up and down that no, no, no. But just as I suspected, on day 3, as the meds finally got out of her system, she started having them again. And I think you were there. You said she had 2 initially, and they caught them, and then they finally unhooked her.
Well, they didn't unhook her initially.
She was tied 3 days with all these nodes on her head, which had probably a couple of yards of, it was probably like a 10-foot long
It was
wire.
it was like 5 feet long. She had a
When
little
she was able to run all the way to the bathroom and use the bathroom, she was
she had a backpack. They had it in a backpack, if you remember. They put the little monitoring thing in a backpack, and it was
but
only
that was still tied to the machine though. I remember she was essentially on a leash. She had like 8-foot leash or something that she couldn't really get away from it.
Yeah. So when the medication wore off and she started to have the seizures, I remember vividly that the first one was at night. It was about like midnight, and the lights were off, and I heard it, and so I immediately ran and I pushed the red button. You're supposed to push the red button because the room that she was in, they had cameras so they could look at the actual footage. So I clicked the lights on. I pushed the red button, and the camera, so they could see the footage associated with that point in the EEG of the brain activity. And so that happened twice that night. And then they came in the next morning and they said that the neurologist that was on schedule came and said, look, like we noted, so we saw that you pushed the button. We saw it's not registering that it's seizure activity. However, there's some unusual activity in the brain. We're going to keep it on for one more day, and then go from there. And so once that happened, she had a few more seizures throughout the day, and same thing, click the button, and it was daytime, so the light, like it was very bright in the room, and they could see it. And by this time, the neurologist had switched over. They obviously turned over, and there was a woman at this time, and she came in and she had said that, once again, it doesn't look like seizure activity, but there is some unusual activity going on in the brain. What we're going to do is we're going to get an MRI. We're going to take her off the EEG, and we're going to get her an MRI. And I want to preface this next part of the story is that we were at Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters in Virginia Beach, or Norfolk, excuse me.
Norfolk.
And it's a teaching hospital. And I am not going to badmouth anything in the Navy wise, but I was very reluctant. I know that we had this conversation. I told Jasil that I didn't want to go to the Naval Hospital. I wanted to go to a children's hospital because I felt like it was better for our needs and things of that nature. So a lot of the interactions that I had with the doctors throughout the week were also, there was many interns that were in there. And so it wasn't like it was a one-on-one conversation. Think about Grey's Anatomy. It was like Grey's Anatomy, right? And so every time that she was explaining something, she was going very in detail and then looking at doctors and talking to them and in front of me and trying to explain everything. So that happens. Obviously day 4, I think we're at day 4.5.
I will say before the MRI, before they even decided, I think a nurse told us, oh, you guys are probably going to be out of here by tonight.
Yeah.
So we have our hopes up because, they've seen these on the machine. They're telling us it doesn't look like seizure activity. And then this nurse tells us, you guys are probably going to be home by this evening. Like everything's fine kind of thing. And in my head, I'm like, okay, but what's going on? Like, we don't have an answer yet, but they're saying everything's fine. Like, we're going home. Everything's great. And then the next day was that they were like, we're going to do an MRI in the morning. And I came for that. So I could be there for that. So I left Lumi with her friends again for that.
Yeah. And so the next morning, it wasn't right when they said, like they initially said, hey, we're going to do it at 7 o'clock in the morning. They held her, she wasn't allowed to eat or they let her drink water, but she wasn't allowed to eat anything from like 10 o'clock that night or the previous night on. And 7 o'clock came around, it was delayed. And I think around 10 a.m. in the morning is when they finally got her in. And, we got the news on February 12th, midday. And a lot of people came into the room. There was roughly like 7 people. And I don't think we both, I can only speak on myself, but I don't think we both realized what she said at first. When she started talking about what they found on the MRI. I just remember that they found a mass, a golf ball sized tumor. And, like she was explaining. And then for me, about 30 to 45 seconds later, I started to break down. I started to like tear up and cry.
Yeah. For me, it almost felt like, watching myself, like when you watch a movie and you see all the doctors walk in, you're like, duh, they're going to give you bad news. But like when you're sitting in that chair and you see all these people walking, like, I'm like, no, like in my head, I wasn't even like counting or realizing that a group of people just walked into your room. Like you're still sitting in the chair, hopeful, optimistic, like that's not me. That's not going to be me. That's not my life. And that's why I think it's so hard to hear what they say, because you're in your head being so hopeful of that's not the news we're going to get. So once again, if you were watching a movie and you see 7 doctors walk in, you're like, you're about to get really bad news and you don't even know it. And sitting in that chair, that's exactly how I felt. Like I was watching myself. Part of me was watching this happen. And then the part of me that was sitting there had no idea it was happening. It was like, and like you said, like when they said it, I was still like, wait, like in my head, I was like, what? And I had to like, and they're like, and they're still talking. And I'm like, I'm like, I need you to pause. I need you to rewind because I didn't hear what you said. And it's like, you heard it, but you don't want to accept it as truth in that moment. So yeah, it took me a couple of minutes before my mind wrapped around what actually came out of the doctor's mouth. I think the best thing in that moment that we heard was that as a DNET brain tumor, it was non-cancerous They said it didn't show any signs of cancer, so it wasn't, there was no edema, there was no swelling
Well, if you
around.
remember, if you remember, initially there was confusion. That
So
intern, there
you
was
see, I wasn't confused about that, but you can talk on that. But yes, because so initially when the doctors were there and said all that, um, I was like, cool, great, that's great news. Like, yes, she has a mass, but it's not cancerous, so that's great news. Well, then afterwards, it was that she came in and we were talking about that and we re-asked her, and that's when then she said, no, yes, it is. But I had read the report. They had given us the report and
yeah.
everything, and I was sticking to what the report had said. But you can speak on that if you'd like.
Yeah, no, so I mean, after one of the interns, the actual neurosurgeon intern, she wasn't a neurologist, she was a neurosurgeon, said, yeah, it's a cancerous tumor. And I was getting stuck on that because, like we had heard that it was non-cancerous, and Jasil and I were back and forth about it. I'm like, look, this is what, like she said. And it caused a lot of turmoil for myself, internally, because I'm like thinking that my daughter's gonna die in like 6 months. And then the next day she came back, and the intern came back and apologized deeply that she gave us that information because it wasn't a cancerous tumor, that it was a DNET tumor that was just, they don't know how long it was there. One of the things that I've learned, not only with Linavelle's process, but through my own process of being told that I have tumors, is that we that tumors are actually can be common in people. We don't know about them until we get pictures of the brain, right? So like you could have a tumor and never know in your whole life unless you get a picture in your of an MRI of your brain. And so
Like
like
for instance, in Linavelle's case, they explained this to us that the only reason she's having seizures is because of where it's located in the brain. So you can have tumors all throughout your brain. If it is not in a place where it induces seizures, then you may not even know. And we don't go around scanning our brains unless something's wrong. Like we have a symptom, in which her case, she was having seizures. That is a symptom. But the majority of the people um, won't have symptoms, and brain tumors come and go, and we have no idea that we ever had them or that we have them, and that they also can just go away unless once again you have a symptom from that tumor.
yeah, and so like understanding that, I use myself as example of I have brain tumors, and the location that they're at, like mine and Linavelle's pathology, like on the cellular level, are about 90% the same, from, like getting feedback from her neurologist and the doctors that I was being seen by. And because of the location of my tumors, I'm not having seizures. It's all dependent on the location. Another thing, the reason why they were saying that it didn't register as seizures on the EEG was because it wasn't a localized seizure. It wasn't in one specific area of the brain. It was actually going on in different parts of the brain, and they were deeper. So uh,
They
her
also said, yeah, I remember they said it was because her brain tumor is on her left temporal lobe, but it's not on the outside. It's like in between the lobe, like two of the parts of the brain, very deep. And that was like we'll talk about that later, but that was like another reason why we chose not to do surgery. But
Yeah. So we got the news. I want to just throw this out there. We got the news. We both were in shock, so to speak. And then we started to cry and grieve. And I want to ask you, like, what was going on? Like, talk to me at that point in time. What was going on as you look back now, inside of you?
I mean, my thought process was that she would never have a normal life, um, that she would require a lot of care, that, you know, life would never look the same for any of us. Like that, we would have to have the constant care, that, it's a special needs child, um, that she wouldn't be an average adult, that she would essentially need us to care for her maybe for the rest of her life. Even though they said it was non-cancerous, it's in her brain. It was causing these really bad seizures for, I think at the time, the longest she had was like up to a minute, sometimes 90 seconds. And my fear was that I didn't know how long this would go on, how it's affecting her brain, her development, and what she would look like in the future. And that's really, I think, more my sadness and grief at the time was, I'm she's not going to have a normal life, and she's going to suffer. Like it's really what it was. It's like she's not going to have a normal life, and she's going to suffer, and she's not going to know what it is to like be a normal human, or average human, um, because of this. And like even by then I was constantly watching her around the clock, because she had fallen off things while having what we called episodes at the time. She had fallen off things while having seizures, and that was like another big part of me is, I was also sad and suffering that what my life would look like as a mom of four, now having a child that required so much attention around the clock. I was like, how can I possibly do more than what I'm doing? And like that was another big part of it, that I was like, I cannot expand any more than I am right now to do all the things I have to do and help this child. Because one thing with her was, when she was having these seizures, she didn't want help. She would run from me. She would run from us, and she would hide and go finish in a closet. Like she's like literally falling over, like hopping around, because on the left side of her brain, her right side of her body wouldn't function the same during these seizures. And even up to like 3 minutes after the seizure, it took a while for her body to like come back online. So she's literally trying to run away while her whole right side of her body is not functioning. And I'm like, girl, like, let me just hold you. And she's like, nope. But that's always been Linavelle's independence and will of, I don't need anyone's help. And I would never think of a 2-year-old child being this way, but I have a 2-year-old child who literally in mid seizure is like, I don't need your help. Leave me alone. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, this cannot be normal. And for a long time, I couldn't tell like what was personality and what was seizure, because I'm like, you're literally falling, but you don't want me to touch you. Like, you rather just let you fall and, eat shit on the ground from a seizure. And really, like, we spent a lot of months of that. And I would get so frustrated because I'm like, why won't you just let me help you? And it was very hard as a parent, to watch her go through that and not want help. She did not want help from us. She wanted to go through this by herself on her own, and she would come to us afterwards like, okay, it's done, it's over. And then there was a lot of naps at the time, because they were so hard on her. Like almost always, if as they got worse, even after we found out she had a lot of bad episodes, it usually came with a 20 to 30 minute nap, because her brain needs that rest time.
Yeah, I remember the gambit of emotions that came up for me, like obviously like a lot of sadness and grief came, but I had a lot of anger that came up. And I remember having a lot of thoughts, and I can't remember if I, told Jasil this, maybe I did, but like one of the things was like, as a man, like when you look at like your offspring, you like you want them to be healthy. And like I felt like as a man, like that was a hit, my children, like my child had this this tumor in her brain. And like, was this for me? Like I started to shift to a victim mindset. But I also had a lot of anger because like I started to suppress my anger and what we were going through by working more, or like choosing work more than the family. Like Jasil didn't have that same outlet that I did. And ultimately I started to realize like I didn't want to be at work either. Like I wanted to be home and be with Linavelle more. But that process, like that initial process, like there was so much sadness and anger because of like I felt like this was something that like I was genetically I couldn't produce, I couldn't, my 23 was not sufficient enough to produce a healthy baby. And I'm not switching it to take the story. I really want to be authentic and say like that's what came up for me. And I also hurt because no one wants to see their child go through that stuff. Like remember showing multiple people videos of Linavelle having an episode, having a seizure, and they got very squirmish and like they had to like say, hey, please turn it off because it's not a pleasant video, right? Like and Linavelle chose us. She chose me, and she chose Jacil. And like this journey is, as I look back on it, I've been very emotional just talking with and listening to Jacil talk about it because like you sometimes get numb to the journey, right? Like you get numb to the journey. You're like, I just got to figure it out. And when you reminisce, you're like, like holy crap, that's a lot. And I'm just very thankful, like looking at it now, like where we're at. Like one thing that um I am thankful. I'm going to turn this to Jacil and I for a second. I'm very thankful for like Jacil and her curiosity around life because going into our relationship, into parenthood, we were really like both like, hey, it's just tradition. We're going to do the norms, right? We were going to live inside the box, but like at a very early on in our marriage and in our relationship, Jacil was very curious around our children, and she developed a vision and a mindset for how she wanted to. I say we, but she specifically took the lead on how she wanted the parenting to be, and some of my anger up to that point was like, am I am I am I taking enough action in the parenting realm? Like I felt like the path that we were going at first, I started to question like, well, is this, staying out of hospitals and doing, like going the holistic approach, is that really working? And what's funny is like as we've gotten farther away from that diagnosis, I'm realizing that that is working. And I'm seeing it with my own path right now, with regards to a approach, how there's an approach out there called German New Medicine, and I'm realizing, not with Linavelle's tumor specific, well, with her tumor, but like with my own psychological aspect of like we get stuck in tracks sometimes, and environments play a big factor of how that goes. Like I'm realizing that it is more of a holistic approach that we need to take. Like if you take it back down to the earlier days where there was no medicine and things, yeah, I'm sure there was more deaths, but there's also like people were more in tune with their bodies, and they knew what they
Yeah, but that's
need.
not, that's another, people think there were more deaths back in the day. And I wouldn't say that necessarily true. You got to see on why.
Yeah. And
But
so like I fully am thankful for Jacil's take on that, because as we've evolved and we've started to lean more into that, um, our kids, like I can look at our other kids, and we talked about it the other night, is like Grayson and Caden, like they haven't gotten sick in a while, right? Um, and so like the food that we eat, the environments we're in, the way that we're nourishing our body has a big play into that. And so with Linavelle, we were we tried so we'll get back to the story now. I was like, they diagnosed her. They said, hey, let's give her Keppra. And
so the whole thing with her brain tumor is, um, we spoke to the neurosurgeon there. He said he wouldn't touch it, the brain tumor. He's like, I wouldn't operate on it. So we decided to get a consult to go to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And the only other step forward was to give her medication for the seizure. So they said, there's really nothing to give for the tumor. All you can do is control the seizures. And that was the neurologist's priority, is just control the seizures, make sure that they go away. And, they would monitor the tumor every 90 days for the first year. And as time went on, that would eventually turn into like 6 months, and then like once a year, then once every 2 years and whatnot. So when we went home, they put her on Keppra. And, I didn't look much into it. They assured me, they do the whole pregnant women are able to take this medication. It's super safe, blah, 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 all that stuff. And at the time I didn't have an answer. And this was like way out of my scope of what I had learned as far as taking care of illnesses and ailments at home with, holistic medications and food. So I was like, I want the seizures to stop. So I'm just going to give her the Keppra to buy myself time to figure out what I want to do. And within a few days of her being on this, and we had to up her dosage, I think 3 times, because she was still having what they would call breakthrough seizures from the amounts of medication she was taking. And anger started coming out. Like, she was raging. And I'm talking about, like, this child went from, yes, she was independent and, strong-willed and all this, but then she turned into a strong, independent, and angry child, like launching things across the room to her brothers and like doing things that she wasn't doing before. And I brought it up to the oncologist one day during an appointment. I said, hey, like, I've noticed something interesting. Like, she seems to, like, she's very angry, like she's raging. And he's like, huh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that, all of this. And I was like, you know what? Why am I talking to this guy? This guy is not the one at home with the kids. I need to find the people who are at home with the kids. So I went to Facebook and I found, Facebook groups of parents with children with brain tumors, with DNETs specifically, and all of this. And I put in the search bar, Keppra. And lo and behold, what does every other post say about Keppra? That their children were also having these angry rages. And I said, huh, so it is the medication. I'm not making this up. I'm not creating this in my head. And I saw it because I slowly weaned her off of it, and the rage disappeared. And then I put her back on it. The rage came back. And at the time, she was also on cannabis. She was also, we started, I started, diving into like brain tumors and all of this. And I came across, like cannabis, like using CBD oils and all this stuff. So I started using CBD. So at the time that I was weaning her off the Keppra, she was still taking CBD, which we noticed like it helped with some stuff, but CBD was not touching the seizures at all. We also bought a lot of like mushrooms, and I'm not talking about psychedelics. I'm just talking about like reishi and lion's mane and turkey tail. I found out about Paul Stamets and how his mom had breast cancer, and she did a couple of things, but a big thing that she incorporated was his turkey tail supplement, a mushroom supplement, and the breast cancer disappeared, and she's been clean ever since. And I mean, this is like a decade ago. I don't know if the lady's still alive today, but at the time of the video, he has a TED talk on YouTube. But anyhow, I really started diving into how am I going to get out of this. Like, I don't want her to be on this medication for the rest of her life. And the neurologist even told us, people who take this will be on more medication. She told us that the first time she gave it to us. She said, this medication is going to cause side effects of other things. And most people end up on 3 to 4 meds. And in my head, I'm like, because that's the way to live life. Like, let's just put you on this medication that's not going to screw up all these other things. So we'll put you on a second medication to fix the thing that the first one screwed up. Now that was going to screw up a few more things. So we'll just keep going down this path until you're on 3 or 4 of these. And that was like really one of my drives of trying to find a solution, a different solution for this, because I was like, I don't want my daughter be on 4 medications that are all causing different side effects. It doesn't make sense. Like, that's not helping the body.
And I remember,
Um,
specifically, and I don't know if you remember me, but I was really asking the question of like what were the long-term effects of this medication. And I say that because my sister had seizures as a young kid, and that she, at that time, and I can't speak on it now, but like she was having a really big battle with like mental health like disorders and things of that nature. And my biggest fear was like, hey, we're stopping it now, but like, what is the effect later? You know, because of with conversations with my father, and then also with the neurosurgeon, the male neurosurgeon that we first saw. He did say that there was like mental health side effects from these medications if administered for a long period of time. and and so like that was our biggest thing, or my biggest thing was like, I don't want to put her on a medication that stops the seizures now, and then she's struggling as an adult with mental health side effects. And like a lot of those conversations drove us to looking into cannabis.
yeah, when we went to the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia in March. The neurosurgeon there kind of gave us the same response as the one in Norfolk. They said, he said, we can go in there, and he's like, we can scrape away at, certain parts of the brain tumor. But what he explained is that it seems like it has been there her whole life, and she had just turned 3, or she hadn't even turned 3 yet when we went to this appointment. Her birthday's March 28th. They said that there was a lot of blood vessels there that seemed like they were growing with the tumor. So if they went in and tried to like dissect the whole thing, there was a very big chance of her bleeding out. And I was like, yeah, nope. I was like, we're not doing that. And then the other part of that was, he said, we can like, take a piece from here and here and here. And he's like, at the end of the day, we don't know which piece is actually causing the brain tumor. So he's like, we could essentially go in there, scrape away at different things. And when she comes out of surgery, she's still having seizures. And I'm like, so what's the point of the surgery in the first place? So that basically sealed my, hey, are we doing surgery or not? Because it just did not make sense. And I was already aware of German New Medicine at the time, and I started diving into it. And German New Medicine says that tumors aren't bad, that tumors are actually a way of our body's healing. So if we think about the body as an intelligent whole being, there's nothing that your body's going to do to make itself ill. Your body's always trying to be at homeostasis or heal. Your body's not trying to kill itself. So this thing with like autoimmune disease and this and that, there's always a deeper cause in the psyche, a deeper reason. And it usually comes from a shock in our lives that leads our bodies to run these programs. And if we get to the core of it, we can usually solve the issue instead of trying to like figure it out. And there's been cases where people take out whole brain tumors and then they die because the brain tumor wasn't, it wasn't what was killing them. And that was like, I kept going back to that. So I started diving into a few things. I watched a ton of documentaries about cannabis, came across Dr. Bonni Goldstein out of California, who's a huge cannabis advocate, especially for pediatric children. She's worked with many families, anywhere from ADHD to tumors and cancer and all of it. And just watching her speak and everything that she had to say about cannabis, and watching all these other documentaries where people, essentially their brain tumors melted away, or their tumors in general melted away, cancers like held at bay. I know that there's more than one way to cure something. I'm like, there's a million different ways. So that's where my focus heavily went into cannabis. So after about 2 months, I weaned her off the Keppra, and I had her on just cannabis. And we knew that the CBD wasn't doing much. And once watching these documentaries and hearing Dr. Bonni Goldstein talk about the entourage effect, I realized that what was going on is that she was only receiving a very, very small portion of the plant. And what's most effective is whole plant extract. So you don't want just the CBD or just the THC. You want a combination of everything, because we have the same system inside our body. So when we take in cannabis, the way they explained it is like, having a key and keyholes, and they match together. And what cannabis has, actually, we hold the same things inside our body, and they can match each other and like fix the, and that's why like it can help certain things. Like when people are like, I can't sleep, and I can't this, and I can't that, and I feel so anxious, and I feel that. And if they smoke or they take an edible, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this calming effect is because the cannabis is finding that inside your body and essentially like matching all the keys and the locks together. I'm not a scientist, so look it up. She explains it in one of her documentaries.
They're called cannabinoid receptors, what you're talking about.
Yes, but like the way they explained it, it just made sense, that I was like, oh, that's why it helps. So we found THC for her, and we got her, I applied in Virginia. I applied for a medical marijuana card, and we also like tried different things. And the problem, like one of the big setbacks of why doctors don't want to use cannabis is because it's not a one size fit all. So with cannabis, hundreds of different plants, people love to just say indica and sativa. And the truth is, cannabis is so much more complicated than this is indica and this is sativa. So much more than that. And every strain has a load of terpenes, and it's all different percentages and all this stuff. And that is why I do see the importance of it having some type of regulation, to where you can see this information, because then you know why it works. Where we were having that issue with our daughter, where we had unlabeled stuff and we didn't know why it was working well, then we would try something else and we didn't know why that wasn't working well, because there was no facts on it. Like we didn't know what was actually in it. So I turned to the dispensaries, because I could actually see the label in the back of what's in there, and I could see the percentages of THC, and I could adjust from there, from having that information. And the other part of cannabis is you can't just take it 2 days and see an effect. Like it can take a week, it can take 2 weeks, it can take 6 to 8 weeks. Typically what I noticed with her, anytime we changed strain, there was about a 5-week period if I wanted to see how the actual strain worked. So there's only so many weeks in a year. And watching her have seizures, every time we had to switch dosages or we had to switch strains, and then having to wait that 6-week period was very hard for me. We did find this one, unicorn strain that worked marvelously well for her, that brought her seizures down to where she was having anywhere from like 10 to I would say she had anywhere from 5 to 30 a day, depending, like if she had a really bad day. And then having those every day to only having 5 a week. In a whole week, she only had 5 seizures. And right when we hit that sweet spot was week 4, and we ran out of the cannabis. And when I went back to the dispensary to buy that same strain, they were like, we're out of stock. We don't know when we'll stock it again. I even went as far as driving to their like main dispensary up in Richmond, Virginia, and they, gave me replacements. Another thing is that so much of this is made for the smoker, is not made for medical. So actual medical marijuana for my daughter would be in a syringe form, where I can give her the oil, where everything they sell is in a vape, is for dabbing to, like it's a resin. I can't, like, it's hard to give the same amount if it's not in a syringe form, in an oil form, where I can extract it and say, okay, I know I'm giving her this much every time. So then that was another big part, is like, yes, cannabis is becoming this big thing in many states, but it's still not for the medical use, really. It's for the smoker. It's for the people who want to fucking smoke. And I was like, and everybody doesn't smoke. And granted, like, do whatever you want, cool. But at the time, I was so frustrated with the system and the way it was built, because here I am with a child who's benefiting from this, but I'm having to like jump through hoops to make it happen for her. But anyway, I'm hoping that that's, one of the things in the future, is that it gets removed as the class drug that is currently labeled as. So people can research this and people can study this, and we can actually make real medicine. And there is a CBD medicine currently on the market that I could have gotten for my child, but being in the Navy, they were like, we may or may not approve it, blah, 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 but you can try. But the other part is they make it into a pharmaceutical. So it has dyes, it has flavoring, it has all this stuff. Like, I'm not, might as well give them a pharmaceutical. Like, that's not the point of taking cannabis. So what I hope for the future for the cannabis industry is that, yes, it gets used as medicine, but not that it gets turned into a pharmaceutical, because that to me doesn't make sense. That's what we're trying to get away from. Why take plant medicine and make it a pharmaceutical? It doesn't make sense. But anyhow, we saw results with the cannabis, but there was also the downside of cannabis, that it did have side effects. And one of those things is like, she, I can't really describe what was going on inside her body, but she was having feelings to where she was grinding her teeth constantly. She was biting things all the time. She went to time periods where she had no appetite. So then I bought her like this, herbal tincture to up her appetite, which helped. And she would get hungry and she would actually eat. But it was really hard going through this, because it always felt like we were changing what we were doing and trying to figure out what it worked. And every time we would hit another bump with something. Like if we went too high on the THC, she would not want to eat, or, she would just turn into a vegetable. Then, or sometimes it would even make her a little bit of aggressive and irritable and things like that. And then there was some THC that made her really freaking sleepy, and she would just like knock out all day. So it was like, once again, it was just a constant adjustment of like, what's working, what's not working, where do we go from here? Have we tried this long enough? Because that's another thing, is like, you may think it's not working the first week, but you have to try it for minimum like 3 to 4 weeks to see an actual change. And that was what I found most difficult of using cannabis with her.
Yeah, at what point did you say to yourself, like, hey, this is working? Like, cannabis is the route that we needed to be taking.
Because I saw her seizure count go down. So when she was on CBD, I saw some changes when she was on really high doses of CBD, but it was too much for her body, even though I saw the changes in the seizures. And then that's when I was like, well, maybe I should introduce THC, which if you look into seizures and cannabis, Charlotte's Web, by the Stanley brothers, is a big, known brand. It was named after a girl named Charlotte Figge, who had Dravet syndrome, and she was having, I think, like 300 seizures a day or something. And there's a documentary on YouTube about her, but her mom, up and moved to Colorado and everything. And she went from essentially being a vegetable to actually starting to walk and formulate words and feed herself and like do all these things that she had never done as a child, because she was just having seizures around the clock. And she did pass away a couple of years ago. But I tried that, which is CBD, but it's very potent. The way they make it is not the way they make a lot of these other CBDs nowadays. They still use like the old, I forget what's the difference, but they don't use, I think it's called the double extract method, but something else about it. I forgot. At the time I knew all of this, my brain deletes once it doesn't need information. So, but anyhow, it's very dark and it's very strong. And, so many people have great results with this Charlotte's Web CBD, and we bought that for her. And when I got her on it and I started low and slow, because they always say low doses, go low and go slow, give it time to work. Some of the worst seizures I've ever seen in Linavelle was on that Charlotte's Web, like the worst. I remember the first time, after I had been giving her these low doses, I upped it a little bit because she was still having a lot of seizures. And she had one of the longest and one of the worst seizures I had ever seen. I think it was over 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes, and it was horrible. And that's where, like, it's not one size fits all. And while for some kids that has been the answers, for my kid, it was the worst thing I could have put inside her body. So knowing that, that is why, you know, doctors are probably, or the pharmaceutical industry is so against cannabis, because you just don't know. You don't know how it reacts from person to person. The side effects is so different from person to person. It is so, you know, like there's no control in a sense.
So take me to the time where we got our last MRI in the Navy. Our last MRI that we got. Um tell me what was found, and then let's talk about, you know, the weaning her off pharmaceuticals and the basically what cannabis did for us.
Well, what I will say is, after, so last Thanksgiving, that was one of the worst times for Linavelle, where she was literally a couch potato for multiple days. She didn't want to do anything. She was heavily addicted to her iPad at the time. And that started with her first hospital visit. The hospital gave her an iPad, and then it just became this thing. Like every hospital visit, we gave her an iPad. And then she became addicted to it in the house too, because of her behavior and the way she was. It made it easier to just give her an iPad and, like, you know, have her essentially not here. And, you know, I wanted to take it away because I saw what it was doing, but I didn't know how. And we had a friend who took her in and helped us and brought her back iPad weaned. Um, but around January of this year, early January, she was laying down in the bedroom, or the master bedroom, used to be our kids' bedroom. And I remember telling Alex, hey, like, I'm running around doing chores and laundries and whatnot. Like, I need you to keep an eye on her. And he said, okay. I don't know. He left to go do something. And I was running back into the house, like to the back of the house to do something, when I happened to like look into the room real quick just to check on her, because I know she was by herself. And I just see her like this on the floor. Like she was just, and immediately, like, I knew she was in a seizure. So I ran over, and within 5 seconds of looking at her, I could tell the seizure wasn't a normal one. Like it wasn't like anything she had before. And the seizure continued on for another like 12 minutes. And we don't know how long she already had been there. We're assuming the seizure probably lasted anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes. And we had to call the ambulance and everything. And we took her to the hospital, and she was just like waking up as we arrived to the hospital. We had emergency meds for any seizure lasting over 5 minutes, which we administered twice because the seizure lasted 12. We did the first dosage at 5 minutes. We did the second dosage at the second 5 minutes. And then she was basically knocked out after that till we arrived to the hospital, is when she started waking up. And at that point, I was defeated. Like I was done with all the cannabis, like switching and trying to figure out which strain and how to do this and blah, blah, blah. Her having seizures around the clock. She already had broken her wrist from having a seizure, and falling off something. She had fallen off a park, like 9 foot high structure, straight down to the floor. Like all these things, like as a parent, I was just like rock bottom. Like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know where else to go. When she had the seizure, I was like, you know what? I don't care. I just want the seizures to stop. Like I tried the holistic way. I'm trying to figure this out, and I do not know what's the answer forward. Interestingly enough, though, at the time throughout her scans, we noticed that her tumor was shrinking, though the doctors would never say that. They would always say no changes. That's all they said. But we would always ask for the reports and ask for the CDs, and we would read everything, and we looked at the numbers, and we're like, it's shrinking. Like, according to the numbers, the tumor is shrinking. But they didn't say that. So this happens in January. They offer us a second pharmaceutical. I said yes. I was like, I don't care. Sure, let's do it. And it was called trileptal. And what we noticed is that it immediately reduced her seizures. I think it took a couple of weeks, but immediately we saw a reduction in her seizures. It didn't seem to have any side effects at the time. So I was like, cool, it works. Let's do it. And then in February, she had her 12-month scan. And that was the first time her neurologist actually said her tumor has shown a decrease in size. They won't say shrinkage. They say it's not the terminology they use in in their world, they say involuting. So they were like, the tumor seems to be involuting. And, we were happy, we were excited because we were seeing the numbers do that, but they would never say it. So it was the first time they said it out loud to us that her tumor was shrinking. And, we can attribute that to many, many things. If, we do it on a physical level, we could say, yeah, it was the cannabis. But what I also know that throughout that year, Alex and I did so much spiritual work, so much inner work of trusting and changing our mindset on so many things and beliefs and things like that. And that was like one thing, we seeked a spiritual teacher that we were seeing throughout, that whole year right after we found out about her. And to me, so much of what we experience in this plane is also through our spirituality. Like, we don't come here to have vacations. Like, our life is not supposed to be one big vacation. Like, we're meant to experience the ebbs and flows, the downs, the ups, all of it, because that's where we grow, that's where we expand. Like, if I look back, had we not had this, part of our journey occur to us, like, where would we be? What would we be doing? Like, it has been the catalyst for so much growth, so much expansion within both of us, internally, within ourselves, within each other, with us as a family. And also looking at my child now as this innately beautiful, wisdom filled, child, like a soul who came here with a purpose and knows what they're doing, versus seeing her as a victim of this thing is happening to her and it's the worst thing that could be happening to her, instead of saying, you know what, she chose this for herself. Like, she came here to have this experience. She came here to teach people something through this experience. And who am I to say that she's having a horrible time when she chose this for herself? Like, we don't come into this world having cancer and brain tumor without having chosen it for ourselves before we came into these bodies. And really, that comes down to a belief: is life against you or is life with you? And if life is always co-creating with you and you are co-creating with life and everything's here for you, then there is no bad thing. There is no horrible thing. Like, it's here to expand you. It's here to make you grow. And that was, after that seizure and getting her on trileptal, that's when we moved into the RV. And I really started, looking towards nature and watching her and observing her and seeing how smart she was. And when it comes to her bodies and the things she takes in and she eats and the way she acts. And one thing we always knew is, like, she hated being indoors. Like, if it was up to her, she'd be in a forest all day long, frolicking naked in the woods. Like, that is what Linavelle would be doing right now. Like, if we said, hey, Linavelle, do you want to be in the house clothed or do you want to be outside naked running around the forest? She'd be like, outside naked running in the forest. And I said, what about if this is just her body's wisdom, her inner knowing that this is how she's healing herself, of never wearing shoes, of always touching the dirt, of always being grounded, of, doing all these things, and turning this less of a physical thing more into a spiritual journey for herself, for myself, for all of us. And I think that, once again, with that intention of moving into the RV and all of this, is really where I started honing in on this, that she's not a victim, and I was like, I was trying so hard for a whole year to fix her, to make it go away, by giving her all these vitamins and all these things. And I'm not saying that don't do it, to me, sometimes we need like that sense of placebo effect of, I'm doing this and this is what's making me better, for us to then reach that inner knowing of the healing was within me all along. And that is what I attribute. Like, I don't regret anything I did. I don't regret anything I gave her. I see it as, it was the vehicle to take me to the point of knowing that her body has been healing her all along. And it's not one thing or the other that healed her. It's herself, it's her body, it's her journey, it's what she's chosen in this lifetime. So with that, being on the trileptal, as the summer started approaching, she started denying her medication, which she had never done in a year and a half. Like, she was like, I don't want it. And it started getting harder and harder for us to give her medication. And I think at one point, one of us took her somewhere and forgot to even bring the meds, and she was off her meds for a few days. And we, they tell us that when they're on these medications, it stays stored in their system for a while, and it might take up to a month to 6 weeks before you see a breakthrough seizure again. So we're like, well, maybe she's just in that, that window period where she's just not going to have a seizure because it's still in her system. And one day, I just had the thought of, why don't we just listen to her? Why don't we just listen to what's going on? I said, up until this point, she would eat the nastiest vitamins and medication, like chew it up and eat it, and did not care how disgusting it tasted. And now all of a sudden, she was like, no, I'm not taking any of this. And granted, we were like, oh, well, the kids are getting older and this and that. But obviously, she had done it every single day, no problem. And all of a sudden, it was this thing that she did not want. And I told Alex, I said, let's see what happens. Let's not give it to her. Let's see what happens. And granted, like, I was willing to, if I had to, like, hold her down and squeeze it into her mouth. But once again, going inward, I was like, I don't know where she is in her healing journey. I don't know where she is in her process. We haven't scanned her brain since February. Like, we really don't know what's going on. And something clearly shifted for her. And this was around the same time, once again, we're full-time in the RV. We're immersed in nature more often than not. Our whole entire lives has changed. And then we hit the road. And she stayed off medications. And we can say that today she's 5 months medication free, no cannabis, no pharmaceutical, no anything. And she's 8 months seizure free. And once again, there's many things I can attribute and say, it was this, it was that, it was this, it was that. And truly, I don't know the answer. I don't know what it was. I don't know what one thing is it that brought us to this point. But I do have strong faith and belief that our bodies are extremely wise. They are always trying to bring us to homeostasis. We're always healing, or we are in homeostasis. And I believe that for herself and her body. And it also has given me a different way of seeing children like her. It's not, I shouldn't be striving to make her more like me or make her more like my other children. I should just accept her where she is and how she is. So, people have commented that, occupational therapies and speech therapy and this and that. And I said, what about she's a being who's just so connected into the universe, into the quantum, into everything that makes us one whole universe, that we can never be that. But she is, because she's different and she feels different and she thinks different and she communicates different. And I said, people like that usually have this, other consciousness that we can never even know what it's like. And that's where I like to, create that story in my head, that that's where she is, that it's not that she's this child who's never going to function in the world like us. I hope she never functions in the world like us. I really hope that she functions at such a higher level, higher vibration, that people are able to see more of that and say, you know what, I want to be more like that. Instead of, where we're just working and sticking our kids in daycares and schools and, working till we're 60, 65, and then retire. Or a lot of times we can't even do that, and we just work till we die. And I'd like to think that she and many other kids that are being born like her are showing us the way that life can be so much more simple. When we simplify things, then there's an easiness, there's a joy that just comes naturally. And she is a very present, in the now child. She does not understand later, in 10 minutes, in 20, yesterday, tomorrow. It's what's happening right here and right now for her. And I think that there's a beauty in that, because, some of the teachers I follow is, it comes up over and over again, is that all suffering comes from not being in the present. When you are suffering, it's because you're in your head thinking about the future, thinking about the past. But if you just sat with yourself truly in this present moment right now, as you're breathing, you would not be suffering. So that is what I've learned through her, is to really embody that. And whenever I feel those things coming up for myself, I remember her and I look back at her and I'm like, just be Linavelle, like just be here right now, you know? And that's not to say she doesn't get upset and she doesn't get angry, like she does. But once again, it's just in that moment. And once the moment's over, it's done. Like that's it. Whatever has to come out comes out now. And it comes out big, but then it's over. And it's not lingering. She's not talking about it tomorrow. She's not thinking about yesterday. It comes out and it's done.
Yeah, so I think about, with all of that being said, I think about uh, a framework from Bill Bengston and the Bengston image cycling method. And in one of his podcasts, he talks about um, healing is not healing's not beautiful, right? Like he talked about healing mice, and they like when they put their hands over the mice's cage and they would do these image cycling, and uh, he would do what he would do, that the healing it wasn't always beautiful. Like the tumors got bigger, it got worse before it got better. And I actually think about this in a sense of like when you cut yourself or you get a scab, the scab gets uglier or gets worse before it gets better. And so like for Linavelle, when we talk about this, the cycle, it got worse and then all of a sudden it got better. And we're sitting here
Yeah.
like, holy crap, like what happened? But in reality, she was healing herself from day one, you know. And like Jasil said, like she's been our biggest teacher. She's we have taken a lot of feedback, nonverbal feedback from her, and have made a lot of decisions based off of that. And you know, like she said, we're 5 months free of medication, any pharmaceuticals, cannabis, and 8 months seizure free. So anybody out there listening is like, healing is not always beautiful. And for Linavelle's sake, and you know, like she's a testament to that. Like there was a point where we were both like feeling defeated. I remember, you know, I started to feel really good, or feeling better when we got that scan, that 12-month scan, and it showed that it was shrinking, you know, because I really felt defeated, like you, at that January 13th, when she had that 12 to 15 minute seizure. And you know, like I was like, what are we gonna do? But in those moments of like the hardest times comes the greatest growth. And I continue to remind myself, I think that's the biggest lesson that I've taken away from Linavelle, is like in the hardest times come the greatest growth. And that staying, you know, you have to really listen to your inner self, and stay with that. And you know, like we sit here and have this conversation of her, you know, healing, and that's the first thing. She's 4 years old and she's already left an immense impact on the world.
Yeah.
And
And this is not to say like don't seek medical advice and all this stuff. Like, granted, you break a bone, you know, it's probably easier to just go in and get it fixed. I'm not saying, you know, stay at home and don't seek medical advice, or, you know, doctors and all that. But also like knowing what's your intention behind it and what do you hope to get from it. Because so often we outsource our healing to others and we outsource that power to others, waiting for others to fix us, to fix the problem. And that's, you know, what I saw myself doing during her journey too. And at one point, you know, it switched for me. I said, you know, I'm waiting for them to give me the answer and like help me and fix this. And I said, the help is right here. Like I don't need to go out there to seek the help and find it. Like it's right here. It's internal. And this is where I need to be doing the work, not out there. And I really do believe that when we all as humans learn how to do that for ourselves, or we can turn everything inwards, is when we're going to see humanity as a race level up in consciousness. Because we are living right now where we outsource everything outside of us. Like we are these powerless species who doesn't know how to, you know, do anything other than work and eat and do errands. And it's like we are so much more than that. Like we are made from the same things that this entire universe is made out of, which means that we are just as powerful beings as the entire universe. And one thing we see from nature is that it knows how to cycle, it knows how to take care of itself, it knows how to die when it needs to die, and it knows how to be reborn when it needs to be reborn. And we are the same. And
Yeah.
that's really what I take away from Linavelle's journey, is that we have to take things back inward. We have to stop worrying that in the future and this and that and what, just be present in the now, be grateful, and know that you can heal yourself, you can heal those around you, people can heal themselves, and really like breathing that like breath of life into people of like, hey, all the answers you seek are within you. Like there's no one outside of you who can give you the answer you're looking for. We can give people guidance, we can share our journeys, but we cannot discover things for other people.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful lesson right there. And just very thankful for being on this journey with you and with Linabelle, and continuing that. And as we close up this episode, just immense gratitude for the journey and the process, and um, excited for what is to come of it, right? Because we're still on this path, and we're, Linavelle is a strong-willed, adventurous
Oh yeah.
being, and we still, have to figure out how to guide that. And I say I bring that up because, like, I want to close with your comment on, um the new human, I say the new human race, but like, from like the human design and the higher consciousness, right? And that, like, there's babies and kids being born that have a higher consciousness, and it's coming out in the form of like autism. If you want to talk a little bit about that in closing.
I mean, it's, if you know anything about human design and who he talks about the raves, and he says that we're gonna have this, influx of children being born that are nothing like us. They don't communicate like us, they don't function like us, and we're going to think that these children are like broken, like they're messed up, and we need to fix them. And he says in reality, what it is that they're functioning as such a higher consciousness that they don't function like us. And when they come, I forget exactly what he said, but I think in certain groups of like pods, that is where they're able to like really, come into their magic. And even once again, like, I believe, with having multiple brain states, altered brain states, and knowing that I am not just a human, like I am a soul, we are spiritual, we are all these things, we are divine, we are everything that exists in the universe, is that these children are forcing us, in a sense, to wake up to that reality. Like it's no longer subtle. It's no longer like, hey, you can do this. It's like, hey, no, it's time. Like, you got to do this. Like, and not just to me, like just humanity as a race. Like, hey, it's time, Earth, it's time to wake up. It's time to level up. Like, the time is here. The time is now. And that's really my belief, is they're not waiting anymore. These children aren't waiting, but we keep medicating them. We keep thinking that they're wrong. We keep trying to put them in therapies and make them conform and be more like us. And my question is, are we better? Like, is what we're doing better? Do they have to be like us? Do they have to function like us? And that's been like one of my big visions and dreams, is I want to create a space for children like Linavelle, and children who want to understand that and be more like that, where they can just roam free to discover that part of themselves and show us how to be more of that. Here we are trying to make them be like us. And when I look back in our past of where that has taken us as humanity, yes, we have evolved, yes, we have changed, but has it been for the better all the time? And that's where I'm like, maybe it's time to allow a different type of human to take the forefront of where we go as a species. And that's where I am okay allowing my child to lead and see, like, where do people like you take the world? Because it's been people like us who are taking the world places. And What happens when we allow these other children who we know are super intelligent, like that has been proven that it's not, you know, we know how smart these children are, but yet we're like, oh no, something's wrong with them because they don't talk like us, or because they don't formulate words, and because they're nonverbal. Like clearly something's wrong with them. So let's put them on all these medications to make them better. And really what we're doing is we're hiding their brilliance, we're dimming their lights, and we need to allow these children to be really just lead and be the lights of the world.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. I think that's a good stopping point. And saying that everything that we have said in this, once again, just elaborate, like you have to do your own research. Like what works for us doesn't work for everyone else.
Yeah.
And and we're just very thankful for the process and the guidance that we've gotten in this. And so for next time, we will see you later.
Bye.